for a story about Richard Manuel. This would be part 3. I ran into Richard Manuel as a kid back in 1965 and then 1971, and then we did 2 carnivals together, 80 and 81. And then I would run into him later in November of 1983 when the band was playing in New Orleans. But during Carnival, we were drinking some moonshine, and he mentioned going out to an old booze camp in Arkansas to see Sonny Boy Williamson with his bandmates. And the cops ran him off, and he said he was never so scared in his entire life. And I mentioned to him, how do you think the black moonshine dealer felt? He's like, what do you mean? It's like, man, the guy's selling his illegal moonshine to these, juke joints and honky tonks, and some white guys come out there and get run off by the cops. Man, it must have cost him a fortune in bribes to pay the cops off. He's like, I never would have thought about it, It's like, yeah, man, he must have been really scared, because, there was a certain agreement, with law and order around there, especially in 1965 Arkansas, the powers to be wanted to maintain segregation, and there were just certain rules you had to follow if you wanted to stay in business, and you had to pay certain people off. The local sheriff was usually the first one you paid off. He's like, yeah, I guess you're right. And so I wrote a song about that experience with Richard and Sonny Boy and the guys out there getting run out of a booze camp. And here it goes. 1965. So it's November 1983. And I'm down in French Quarter, hanging out at the Melius Bar, our usual hangout. It's our jumping off spot. We would go there, have a few drinks, listen to the band that would be playing there, and then we'd go hit music venues throughout the night. And the Dino Cruz band was playing that night. And it was set break. We step outside to go smoke a behavioral modification cigarette. We're in an alley on the side of the bar. I look in both directions. No bums, no cops, nobody's around us. Eddie's there, Paul's there, Virgil's there. There's an empty spot here. I look both ways, reach in my pocket to pull out a cigarette to light it up, and guess who walks up? Richard Manuel. And I pulled out my cigarette and I stopped, and I was like, wow, this old guy looks familiar. He's dressed in a suit and everything, beard. He's 20 years older than me almost. And I look at my friends and they're all like, their faces are frozen in the wind. They're scared. They're thinking this could be an undercover cop. And Richard looks at me and he goes up and down, and then he looks at my face and he looks at my hair, goes back to my face, looks at my hair, and then he smiles at me. And I thought, I remember this guy. It's the musician from Carnival. I'm leaving him hanging. I need to say something. I was like, hey man, what's happening? He's like, hey man, I was looking for you. And I was like, wow man, I can't believe you're here. And I look back at my friends and they're still like, freaking out. I was like, oh guys, this is my buddy Richard. He's the best musician I've ever met. He knows how to play 11 different instruments. And right away, Paul Arndt asked him, what band are you in? And of course, Richard would never tell me what band he was in during Carnival. So he starts to give me a music trivia test. He says, he doesn't look at anyone else, he just looks straight at me and he says, well, I was in a band called the Rebels. I was like, I've heard of them, they're from Canada. He's like, yeah. He's still looking at me, not anyone else, straight in my eyes. Then I was in a band called the Hawks, and I was like, Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, I've heard their albums. And there was the other albums with the Hawks and Levon and the Hawks. And he's like, yeah. So then the whole psychedelia thing came, with chocolate Subway and marshmallow overcoat. And I was like, yeah, Glass Onion and Strawberry Alarm Clock. And he's like, who? I've never heard of them. Where are they from? I was like, they're from the West Coast. He's like, I lived on the West Coast for a little while. I don't remember them. And he's like, yeah, so we decided to call ourselves the Crackers. And Eddie's like, that's a dumb name. And I remember him looking over at Eddie, giving him a dirty look for a second. He looked back at me. Then we were going to call ourselves the Crackers, or the Honkies. And Eddie's like, that's an even dumber name, the Crackers and the Honkies, that's dumb. And he looked at Eddie and and he looked back at me, and I was like, it seems like I've heard this somewhere before and I've read it, maybe in a magazine. And so Paul asked him again, so what band are you in? And he just kind of looked at Paul for a little bit, and he looked back at me and he smiled, that big cheesy grin. And I figured it out at this point. He's in the fucking band. And I looked at Paul and I was like, hey man, it doesn't matter what band you're in. If you're in a band, you're in a band. You're always in a band if you play in a band, so you're always in a band. I just kept saying the band over and over again. They didn't figure it out. So Richard did that. That was our signal when we would light one up. And so I had the joint in my hand. I sparked it up, and we start passing it around. And so I turned to him and I was like, "So now you're gonna tell me, huh?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "You know, we talked about this a little bit. So certainly you must have played with some famous people here in town." He's like, "Yeah, I played with a couple of them. You know, what famous people have you played with when you were here in New Orleans?" And he said, "Alan Toussaint." I was like, "Toussaint, touche." And he's like, "Yeah." And Mac Rebenak. I was like, "Doc." Everyone's like, "Toussaint, touche, Doc. Who the hell are these people?" I was like, "Who else?" He's like, "Robert Zimmerman." And I was like, "You played with Bobby here?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "What year was that?" "It's got to be before I moved here. I moved here in '75. He's like, "Yeah, it was maybe the end of '75, but definitely, you know, the end of '65, but definitely maybe 1966. And I was like, "Wow, man." And everyone's like, "Who the hell is Robert Zimmerman?" And I was like, "Man, that's amazing." So the Dino Cruz band just started getting back on stage and performing, and the guys hit the little tube and they went in, and Richard did that again, and I lit up another one. I was like, "Dude, so after all these years, you know, you're finally going to tell me what band you were in?" He's like, "Well, I don't want to tell you. You know, some people, you know, they kind of want to hang out with you and cling on to you because you're famous." I was like, "Yeah, dude, but I knew you from when I was the kid, you know, in South Carolina and shit." He's like, "Yeah, but, you know." So he asked me, "Man, what are you doing tonight?" I told him, "I'm just hanging out, you know, listening to music." And he asked me, "How much time do you have?" I told him, "I'm on my own schedule right now. I've got till the sun comes up." He's like, "Okay, why don't me and you go and hang out and catch music clubs all night long? I'm in town for 4 nights, but I can only hang out 3. I was like, "Really? You're in town that long?" He's like, "Yeah, we fucking love New Orleans." We ended up purposely booking a stayover in town so we could all just hang out and chill, you know. The tour can be kind of grueling sometimes. It can be kind of hard. I was like, "Fuck yeah, count me in." And so the next, you know, we went in, we listened to Dino Cruz. The next set break, we're out there busting up and we're talking about where we're going. We're planning our night. And Virgil is the manager. My friend Virgil Serena is the manager of the Dino Cruz band. He's like, "Hey man, I want to hang out with you guys after, you know, they finish playing. They're all going back home. You know, I want to hang out." "Sure, hang out." And Eddie and Paul, you know, wanted to hang out too. So we go and we hit a couple of music clubs after Dino Cruz finishes. And, you know, they're okay bands. Some of them are original, some of them are cover bands, some of them are mixed. And we're going down to another club off Decatur, and for some reason, Richard and I detoured left off of Decatur because I knew a bar that had cold beer on tap. And so as soon as it was kind of crowded, the bar we went to. And I was like, "Hey man, can I buy you a drink?" And he's like, no, I'm okay." I was like, no man, it's on me, I got it." And he's like, no, I got it. "What are you drinking?" "I'm just, you know, sipping." I was like, "Well, it's obviously Coke. What are you drinking? You know, bourbon and Coke?" Yeah, that's what I'm drinking." "I'm okay though, man, don't buy me nothing." And so I stood in the doorway and he stood next to me. We looked in and there's Alan Toussaint. I was like, "Wow, we were just talking about Alan Toussaint." And all of a sudden Alan looks over at us and he kind of puts his hand up and Richard ducks out of the way. And I was like, "What's going on?" And he's right next to me, but out of the doorway. I know Alan Toussaint, you know. I was like, "Yeah, you mentioned you played with him." He's like, "Yeah, but I don't want to meet him right now. I have a feeling he's gonna asked me to get up on, get up on that piano over there in the corner of the room and asked me to play a song with him. I don't want to do it. I was like, well, man, I got to get a beer. And so I was like, man, I'm going to go in there and get a beer. And all of a sudden, Richard was gone. I was like, where the hell is he? He was like right behind me. He was like hiding. So Alan couldn't sing. So I was like, hey, man, you can step off to the side. I'm going to go get a beer. He's like, all right, but you haven't seen me. So I go to the bar and I order a beer. Bartender pours me a draft, hands it to me and says, hey man, your friend is flagging you over there. I look over at Alan. Alan's like, come here, man. I was like, well, I gotta go talk to him. That's Alan Toussaint. So I go over to him. He's like, hey, have a seat. My name's Alan. I was like, oh, I know who you are. I've seen you play before with Professor Longhair. He's like, oh yeah, I played with the Fest a few times. Hey, I noticed your friend, Richard. I know him from a long time ago, and I think he's a really nice guy. And I'd like for you to ask him if he would come and join me on the piano for a song. And I was like, I looked by the door. I didn't see Richard. I told Alan, well, Alan, I don't sing. We're with a group of people. We're all hitting different music venues. He's like, do you mind going and looking for him and asking him to come back here and play a song with me? And I was like, sure, I'll do that. So I went to look for him and I couldn't find him. I went down Decatur, a few clubs. I didn't see Eddie, Paul, or Virgil. I went back up the other way. I didn't see Eddie, Paul, or Virgil, or Richard. I didn't see any. Then I ended up passing up the bar where Alan was. I went that way. I didn't see anybody, and I went back in, and my beer's like, it's like November, and I was walking fast, trying to cover as much. My beer's about half gone, and I'm about to break a sweat in November, And I went back in, and I told him, man, I'm sorry, Alan, I couldn't find him. He's like, that's all right, have a seat. I was like, well, I've got some friends, He's like, no, come on, have a seat, let's talk. And so I sit down, and I'm talking with him, and, we're sipping our drinks, and he had a mixed drink. And he, started talking a little bit about music, and he knew Richard. They worked on some projects in the past. He didn't get into it. He didn't say what they were, but he said, they had played together, and that he thought he was a really nice guy, and he liked him a lot, and he'd like to talk to him and hang out with him a little bit. So if I saw him, would I please, ask him to come back to that club and sit down next to him on the piano and play a song? I was like, sure, I'll do that. But I need to go. He's like, oh, no, you're gonna have another beer, So he just puts his hand up like that. The bartender's doing something. All of a sudden he looks like, yes, Mr. Toussaint, yeah. And he like, I need one for me, one for my friend. And I was like, I'll go get him. He's like, no, he'll bring him to us. And it was Alan Toussaint. He didn't go to the bar and get his drinks. The bartender brought them to him. It's Alan Toussaint. So we sat there and we had a few beers and we're chit-chatting and everything. I was like, well, man, I gotta go, man. I don't want to lose my friends. Richard may have cut out on me. So I start looking for him again. I hit all the same clubs, and I walk through them this time, instead of standing at the door. First club, I don't see anybody I know. Second club, I don't see anybody. Third club, I see Eddie and Paul. It's like, okay. I go in there, and then I see Virgil off on the side. And Virgil's like, hey, man, what's happening? Man, I thought you ditched me. I was like, no, but I think Richard ditched us. I I've been looking for him. I ran into somebody who wanted to talk to him. I didn't say it was Alan Toussaint because they didn't even know who he was. Well, they would have known Alan, maybe Alan Toussaint, but when Richard said, you know, Alan Toussaint, they didn't know because that was Alan's original name on his first album, Alan Toussaint. They thought Toussaint wasn't classy enough, it wasn't catchy enough. And after his first album, he put everything, you know, Alan Toussaint instead of Toussaint. So, we're hanging out, and Paul's like, hey man, I can't stay long, I'm gonna have to roll here, you know, after the next song, and he took off. Eddie stayed for a little while, and I was like, man, I can't believe Richard would ditch me, you know, especially, you know, as long as we've known each other. He, you know, I first met him when I was a little kid. He remembers my mom, and I was like, wow, I can't believe it, he's got to be around here. All of a sudden I thought, he's back there behind the stage. There was another room, like a lounge, and then there was an alleyway that went to the bathrooms. I'm like, he's back there somewhere. And I told this to Virgil. Yeah, Richard's here, man. I can feel it. And he's like, where? He's somewhere back there. I went back. I looked for him. I didn't see him. Came back. I was like, no, dude, I know he's here. Really? You think he's back there somewhere? Maybe you missed it. No, he's somewhere over here. I can feel it. Now he's somewhere over here. And all of a sudden he came up right behind my ear. Hey man, I'm sorry I had to duck out on you. I didn't want to do that, but I had a feeling Alan Toussaint was going to ask me to join him on the piano and play a song. I was like, yeah, dude, I thought you ditched me. Yeah, Alan wanted me to find you. I looked for you. He wanted you to join him on piano for a song. He's like, yeah, man, I don't want to do that. I was like, why not? He's like, man, I don't like to jam with people unrehearsed. You know, sometimes it can go bad. I was like, man, certainly. Between the two of you guys, you're so fucking talented. Y'all just get up there and have some fun, right? He's like, nah, man, I don't do that shit. You know, I don't get up there and make an ass out of myself, unrehearsed. I was like, well, yeah, I can see that. And so the night was still kind of young for us. It was like maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and we hit a few more venues, and we were in one club, and Richard seemed like he was looking for somebody, and somebody specific, someone he knew. And so he walked around, and then he came back with like this guy and maybe 2 of his friends, and he introduced me to his friends because he knew people in New Orleans. You know, he'd been through there so many different times, and he did the whole name thing. This is my buddy Mike, his friend Ed, and this is Virgil. And they're like, hey, nice to meet you, Ed. Nice to meet you, Mike. And they point to Virgil. What's your name? He's like, Virgil. And they'd shake his hand and they'd say, Virgil Kane is the name, and he served on the Danville train. And Virgil's like, oh my God, I love the band. I love that group. Levon Helm is my favorite singing drummer. Man, everybody goes on about Phil Collins and these other guys. Man, I fucking love Levon Helm. I would love to meet him. And I look at Richard, and Richard looks at me. We just bust out laughing. We're like, you know, chopping each other's ribs and like, you know, holding on, trying not to fall down. And the other guys are laughing too, because they figured out that Virgil had no idea that Richard Manuel was in the music group, The Band, with Levon Helm, the singing drummer. And so it was an inside joke. And we went to another club later, and one of those guys ended up showing up there, the same guy that was like Richard's main friend. I don't remember the guy's name. And he kind of looked like an older, taller version of me, you know, like brown hair, I was in my early 20s. This guy's in his late 30s or something. And he had, long hair and stuff. And we introduced each other to our friends again. And when it came back to Virgil, of course, it was Virgil Kane is the name. And we got a big kick out of that. And so as I would run into some of my friends, I would introduce them to the group I'm with. And when it got back to Virgil, even some of the younger people my age, they're like, "What's your name?" "Virgil." What? "Virgil." "Virgil Kane." And he would go on again. "Man, I love Lee Von Helm." So it was an inside running joke for 3 fucking nights. So anyway, we get through that night, and everyone leaves before the sun comes up. Richard and I, we go out to the Moonwalk, which is the paved part of the levee that runs in front of Jackson Square and big chunk of the river right there in the tourist district. And they have park benches. We go up there and we're burning one, we're watching the sun come up, and I ended up walking him towards his hotel. "You sure don't want to ride?" He's like, no, I'm only a few blocks over here. When I got close, he'd crack some joke. "You don't have to walk me to my door, darling," or some crap like that. I was like, "Good one, man. All right, same time tomorrow?" "Yeah." So the next night, we're out at the Melius Bar. And, it's the same thing. Set break, go out, Richard rubs his hands together, and we're busting up. And like, "What part of the court do you want to hit this time?" So we hit a different section. We went down Bourbon Street, right off it instead of Decatur. And for some reason, we ended up walking by that same bar because they're about 3 blocks apart, Bourbon and Decatur. And I wanted to get a beer. He's like, "Hey man, I'm not even walking by there. I'm not even gonna walk in front of the door. He might see me. Alan Toussaint might see me. I'm going that way. I know there's a club right there. Meet me at that." I was like, "Okay, so I'll meet you there." And so I go by the club, and of course, when I go into the bar, Alan Toussaint's sitting there, and he's got an upright piano, like this, in the corner of the bar, where and he's got a table, and he can just get out of his seat off the table, start playing the upright. And the bar was rectangular shape. It was long like this, and the bar counter was right here. And so as soon as I walk down, he stands up, he points to me and waves me over. I go and get a beer, I go and sit down with him, and he's like, "Have you seen Richard?" I was like, "I didn't see him last night, but I saw him earlier tonight, but he took off in another direction. I'm probably gonna see him later." And he's like, "Man, ask him, if he'll come by and join me on piano for a song." And he asked me, "Did you mention it to him?" I was like, yeah, I did." "And what did he say?" He said, "Well, maybe, maybe." He's like, "Okay." So, I finished my beer, and of course he's like, no, you gotta have a second one. So I have a second beer, we talk, and about an hour's gone by. It's like, "Alan, I gotta roll, man. I want him to ditch me again, I ended up finding him, last night, hours later. It's like, all right, well, let him know that I want to play a song with him on piano. So I catch up to Richard and Virgil, and Paul was there, and Eddie was there that second night, but Paul left early again, and like maybe 1:30, and Ed left about 2 or 2:30. So it's just Richard, myself, and Virgil, and we hit quite a few bars, and they had some good bands, and we even heard a reggae band, and it was kind of weird because it was a white reggae band. Now when you go down in the quarter, especially in the Marinee, they're all, everyone's of some kind of color, they're not tan, the reggae artist. So anyway, we ended up going back to that same bar where he ran into these three friends he knew. And he's like, man, I'm gonna disappear for about an hour. I need to go talk to this guy, not his friends, but that one guy. So I'll be back in about an hour. And so Virgil and I, we hung out, and the band that was playing finished, and then another band got on stage, and Richard hadn't come back yet. And I had this weird feeling that he may have been looking for something to make him feel better, maybe for just one night while he was in town, and something to party on. And I was right. All of a sudden, it was about an hour later, his friend pops up and he's kind of nervous. He comes straight up to me and pulls me off on the side away from Virgil. He's like, hey man, I need for you to keep an eye on your friend. I was like, no, he's cool. He said, no man, I'm worried about it. I need for you to keep an eye on your friend. I was like, well, man, he's not drinking anymore. He's on the wagon. I tried to buy him a drink and he kept putting me off, and he finally told me that he's not drinking. What he has in his hand is just Coke. It's not Coke and bourbon or rum and Coke. The guy does one of these, man, don't hand me that fucking bullshit. You know what I'm fucking talking about. You need to fucking keep an eye on your friend, man. I'm worried about him, all right? Promise me you'll fucking keep an eye on him. Don't let nothing happen to him. Then I realized, okay, yeah, I know what he's talking about. I guess he found his giddy up for the night. And I was like, yeah, man, I think I know what you're talking about. He's like, no bullshit, man. I'm telling you, keep an eye on your friend. I'm worried about it. I don't know if he knows what he's fucking doing. I was like, all right, man, I'll make sure nothing happens to him. I got him covered. He's like, all right, man, I'm getting the fuck out of here. You're not gonna see me tonight again. You might not see me tomorrow night either. I was like, oh shit, this could be bad. So I go and look for Richard. It's that bar where they have the stage, but then they have a lounge behind the stage. It's like a whole wall. You got to go through a door, and then they have like an alleyway for the bathrooms. I went back there. I didn't see him, and I didn't go in the bathrooms. And they had a little bit of a courtyard, possibly. I just kind of poked my head out there. I didn't see him. I went back and hung out with Virgil, and Virgil's like, "Where's Richard? What was that with his friend?" Nothing. His friend was just telling me he's split. He's hitting the road. And he's like, okay, well, where's Richard? Did he ditch us? I was like, no, I have a feeling he's gonna pop up any moment now. It was about 15 minutes later. All of a sudden, I see him cutting through the crowd like this, kind of slow. His eyes, kind of like this. And I was like, oh shit, he's got his shine on, man. He got a fucking good buzz going. And so he came up and he's like, hey man, sorry, I had to talk to my buddy. I was like, yeah, he came up and he told me, and I kind of pulled Richard off on the side so Virgil couldn't hear. Yeah, he told me he's a little worried about you, man. I told him, I'll keep an eye on you. I got your back. He's like, oh, thanks, man. I was like, you got your shine going, huh? Yeah, you good? Yeah, all right. So we listened to the band, and they were pretty jamming. We go and we hit another music venue, and we hang out. And each set break, we'd go outside. As loaded as fucking Richard was, he'd get out there and he'd put his hands together like he wanted to smoke some fucking weed. And I was like, damn, man. So, I'd bust up and, we'd go hit another music venue. And so the night went on, he sobered up. I don't know what he did. I can only imagine. And I'm sure people who know Richard and heard about one of his favorite party drugs. I think you know what it was too. And the sun comes up. We're up on the moonwalk again, right in front of Jackson Square. Watching the river flow. The sun's starting to come up in the east, and big ships are going by. They got the steamships. Well, they're not real steamships. The paddle wheel boats right there. And it's just classic New Orleans. The Mississippi River, the historic, Mississippi River with the paddle wheels. And I ended up making sure I walked him to his fucking hotel, because he had a good buzz. And I didn't know how much sleep he got the night before. So, I just want to make sure he made it there without getting jumped. And so I walked back to my car, which was at least a mile or a mile and a half away, but it was worth it, making sure he got to his room safe. And then that third night, we all went out. Paul only stayed out till about maybe 12:30. He had to work on Monday morning. So we were out Friday, Saturday, and now it's Sunday. And Ed stayed out to about maybe 1:30. I don't think he was working. And Virgil was still with us. 3 nights in a row, Virgil. And we got to that one club where Alan was, and we made sure we just walked past it. I didn't go in to get a beer. He's like, dude, don't go in there and get a beer again, man. I don't want you to lie to Alan. Or, yeah, I've seen him, but I don't know when I'm going to see him again. Man, no, let's just bypass that. So we went to that same club where he ran into those 3 guys. I don't remember the name of the club. And they had a decent band in there. And they were playing originals, which was kind of cool. And Virgil was digging the bass player. He's like doing air bass, like, man, listen to that bass player. He's tearing it up, man. He's fucking good. And I was like, yeah, he's okay. And Richard turns to me, and Richard's straight this night. He's whatever he did the night before, he's not doing it this third night. He did his one trick pony, for his 3 nights out. He had that one night where he caught a good buzz, and it's back to the, whatever he's doing, smoking weed and drinking Coca-Cola. And he's like, the bass player's not that good, man. I was like, he seems pretty good. He's like, now watch. As he goes through the song, he gets to this certain point, and he fucks it up. Listen, watch. Bump, 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 bump. I was like, you're right. And Virgil's like, what are you talking about? I was like, the bass player. He keeps fucking up on one part of the song. Nah, that bass player's fucking killing it, man. He's bad. And Virgil's like doing the air bass, and Virgil, keeps, doing the air bass. And Richard's like, no, man. He leans in front of me because I'm standing between them. No, man, the bass player keeps fucking up. Virgil's like, what? What part of the song? And Richard stands kind of a little closer, so all, both of us can hear him. He's like, you got to listen to music. You got to break it down into 4-track. Drums, bass, guitar, and vocals. Sometimes 5-track. And the bass player keeps fucking up. Listen to the drum. And we listen to the drum. That was good. All right, listen to the guitar. Listen to the vocal. Now listen to the bass. And sure enough, when the bass player got to this one part, he kept hitting the wrong note. And I was like, man, if you wouldn't have pointed that out, I may not have figured it out, because I'm a guitar player and a singer, and I'm listening to the guitar player. But Virgil's over there, like, getting all funky on the air bass, and he didn't figure it out. If I'd have been listening just to the bass, maybe I would have figured it out, but I wasn't listening to just the bass. I was listening more to the guitar player and singer. And Richard's like, yeah, man, you got to break it down into 4-track. And so, man, we're having a great time. And the dude from the first 2 nights, the one that helped Richard get his party favorites, he shows up by himself. And So we're all hanging out and this and that. We go outside and we burn one. Everything's kind of groovy. And the guy ended up, you know, when Richard went to go get another Coke, he's like, "Hey man, thanks for watching your friend. I didn't know if you knew what he was doing. You know, he seemed like he was doing too much. You know, I told him, you got to be careful, man. If you've never done this right here, you need to start out small. Don't go big. You know." And I was like, "Yeah, man, he did all right, man. He was kind of fucked up when he walked up to me, but he was walking and talking, so that was a start. And he got more sober as the night went on. It's like, okay, man, I was worried about him. And then we ended up running into some friends we knew. You know, for a while there was about 8 of us all hanging out, and of course, every time Richard and I would introduce my friend Virgil. They'd like, "What's your name?" "Virgil." "Virgil Kane is the name, and he served on Danville train." And Richard and I we'd be like holding on to each other and trying not to fall down laughing. Virgil ended up going to get a beer. He's like, "Y'all need anything?" Richard's like, "Get me a Coke." I was like, "Get me a beer, draft." So Virgil goes and gets it. And I ended up doing it. "Virgil Kane." He's like, "Man, are you going to tell your friend who I am?" I was like, "No, you want to tell him?" He's like, "Why the fuck am I going to tell him? He's your friend. You tell him." I was like, "I don't want to tell him, man. Let it be our secret, you know, our inside joke." This has been fucking hilarious for the last 3 nights, you know. Every time someone meets him, they start saying, you know, the night they drove Old Dixie down. And Virgil's a light-skinned black guy. And he loves the song "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down." And Levon Helm is his favorite singing drummer. I mean, it's a fucking laugh riot, dude. I've been trying not to fucking fall on the ground laughing every time someone does that. Your friends have been doing it. My friends have been doing it, man. It's fucking hilarious. He's like, "You're not going to tell him?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to tell him." It's like, all right. So we started, you know, picking up. It's starting to get late, you know, 3 a.m. "Well, let's go to this bar." We go there, and that band kind of sucks. They had a band I heard down the street. "Let's go back up the block." We go over there. "Yeah, they're all right." And all of a sudden they end. They stop playing because it's getting late. And he said, "Where else can we go, man? It's like 4 in the morning." I was like, "They always have Johnny White's." And Virgil's like, "Yeah, Johnny White's, you know, it's 24 hours. And Richard looks at both of us. "Man, I've been to Johnny White's. I don't go to that fucking shithole, man. It's fucking small as fuck, and the bands usually suck this time of night. You go there early in the night, they got people jamming, but you go there at fucking 4 in the morning, it's like some drunk wino playing a fucking 3-string guitar." And so we ended up, you know, going to a couple other places, and Virgil's like, "Man, I got to roll." So Virgil cruises, and it's me and Richard. You know, we go and hit one more pub, and it's like, you know, ooh man, it's like 6 something in the morning. You know, it's November. You know, the sun comes up a little later, and it's like, "Hey man, let's go hit the moonwalk." I was like, "Hey man, my car is actually parked in that parking lot. I can give you a ride to your hotel." "No man, let's just get up there, light one up, and walk back to the hotel. You know, it's not far. It's only like, you know, 6 blocks." I was like, "Okay." So we're walking, and we're, you know, kind of summing up, you know, the last few nights. And I was like, "Man, this has been fucking awesome hanging out with you." And he's like, "Man, would you like to meet Levon Helm?" I was like, "Man, I don't want to interrupt anybody's time off. I know you told me, you know, everyone kind of has, you know, the time off, and then on Monday y'all are doing something and you're leaving town on Tuesday." He's like, "Well, some of the guys are doing stuff, but Levon's not doing anything, man. If you want, we can meet up. You can go meet him." I was like, "I'd like to meet him, but maybe next time." And I was like, "Hey man, did you ever tell fucking Rick Danko that you ran into the kid from South Carolina?" He's like, "No, I actually never did." I was like, "Dude, you're fucking kidding me, man. We spent 2 Mardi Gras together, and now we've been out the last couple of nights. You never told Rick, the milk farmer, who, you know, he's got to get back, you know, upstate and do some very important work. And his wife, mentioned, we're dairy farmers. He's like, what, now we're milk farmers? And I was like, oh, you're a milk farmer, huh? And when he told me he had to get, this is in South Carolina 71, when they rented the rental next to me. And he's like, hey kid, I got important work to do when I get back upstate. And I was like, really important work? Real important work. It's like, you gotta milk some cows. And he's like, real funny, and Gracie and Richard start laughing. I was like, well, those cows aren't gonna milk themselves. He's like, real funny. And I'm sitting next to Gracie. He's at the head of the table, me and Gracie here, and Richard's over there. It's, that's a good one, kid. Cows ain't gonna milk themselves. And he looks at Rick, and Rick's like, and Richard's like, no, man, that was a good one. The kid, he cracked the guy. That kid's funny, man. I like you, kid. I was like, you never told Rick? You ran into me. He's like, no. He's like, did you ever tell any of your friends who I was? I was like, no, I didn't tell any of them. I just thought it'd be, our inside, secret. He's like, I was like, are you going to tell Rick? Probably not. Maybe the next time we run into each other, I'll tell him, and I'll make sure you meet all the guys. I was like, oh, fuck yeah, that'll be great. So I walk him to about maybe a block and a half, 2 blocks from his hotel, and we said our goodbyes. I remember him walking off, and he had that brown leather jacket on, and he's just, walking. He's just like walking, not to the sunset, but to the sunrise, because he was, where the river is, he's kind of heading east, and the sun's coming up over his shoulder. And I just thought, man, I'll never forget this moment. I ran into this guy when I was a kid, real young in Arkansas. Then Rick and Gracie, I find them the rental next to my house by Hilton Head. They stayed there almost a month. Richard came down for like a week and a half. I was over there eating lunch and dinner like 12 times, 15 times. They had me over there all the fucking time because Gracie fucking loved me. And then I run into him. We spent 2 carnivals in a row, 80 and 81. First one, we're sipping moonshine, shaving a little time off the day after every sip, and we're like talking about everything, music, blues, rock, royalties, all this stuff. And here I am, when he left in 81, he's like, where do you hang out? And I told him, Amelia's Bar, but I'll give you my number. He's like, no, man, I'm gonna find you. And damn if he didn't. November 1983, he finds me on a set break when we go out to burn one. But who else would fucking know that? Except Richard. The guy's he's thinking my friend's a burner, so set break, that's where I'm gonna find him. All the other people are pissing and getting drinks. He's gonna be outside smoking a fucking joint, and that's how he knew to find me, and he did. And so, the years go by, and it's February 1986. The music group, the band is coming to town, and I go and buy 2 tickets. And I'm thinking, man, band, damn, I think I knew somebody in the band. Who the fuck do I know? Oh, fuck, Richard. Fuck, the keyboard player, the piano player, and Rick. I don't really know Rick, but I know Richard. Wow, this is so cool. And I got 2 tickets. They're playing at Tipitina's. That's the end of part 3. Cheers, folks.